Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to the episode 7 of Transforming Guyana. I am Terrence Blackman, Associate Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York, and the founder of the Guyana Business Journal. And my co host is Dr. David Lewis of the Caribbean Policy Consortium and Manchester Trade Incorporated. As you know, this series, Transforming Guyana, brings together experts and prominent voices from Guyana, the Caribbean, the diaspora, and around the world to discuss the varied impacts of Guyana's oil and gas development. We try to offer a nuanced look at the opportunities and the potential pitfalls ahead for Guyana. And we explore the strategies to maximize the positive impacts that Guyana's oil revenues can have on Guyana's people and future, while sort of mitigating some of the risks that other countries have faced. And in addition, we're also mindful of the roles that the Guyanese diaspora can play in this transition. So today we have a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and it's the intersection of Guyana's indigenous communities and the emerging oil and gas economy. And when David and I sat down to prepare the calendar for the year, this was one of the items that we thought would be important and that we wanted to amplify and highlight. And it turned out almost beautiful, almost perfect symmetry. On December 2, we noted the following. This program was scheduled for December very early in the year. And on December 2, we noted that Guyana sells approximately 30% of its forestry credits to Hess Corporation for a minimum of 750 million US dollars. And so this transaction which occurred, I think, on December 2nd, 2022, between Guyana and Hess is actually quite historic. It's the first ever transaction globally for the sale of these carbon credits. And most important is that the allocation of these funds to the Amerindian communities, based on Guyana's low carbon development strategy 2030, is that 15% of all of the earnings on carbon credits will go to Amerindian communities. And so this was precisely what we wanted to talk about, the kind of notions of equity, fairness, to what extent, is 15% the appropriate number. But so this is the conversation that we wanted to start in a rational and objective fashion that kind of brings all of our voices to the table. And today we're fortunate to have sort of some really wonderful voices. We have with us the former Vice President of Guyana and Minister of Indigenous Peoples, the Honorable Sidney Allicock. We have Florence Alexi LaRose, a consultant on sustainable development and community building, rural development, and indigenous peoples. Unfortunately, we were supposed to have been joined by Valerie Garita-Low, former minister within the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs. However, she's unable to join us this morning. She's in Region 1 right now in a little village which some of you may or may not know called Quibana. It's in the Maruca subregion, and it turns out that the rain is falling almost every day and causing the internet to be somewhat unstable. And so Valerie Garita-Low sends her regrets, and we look forward to having her join us in the future iteration. We're also joined by Charlene Wilkerson, a lecturer in the Department of Languages and Cultural Studies at the University of Guyana and the coordinator of the Guyana Languages Unit for something which will be very important, which we will discuss later, and Trevon Beard, a lecturer in the Department of Language and Cultural Studies at the University of Guyana and the coordination of the Amerindian Research Unit. Let me first begin by inviting David to say a few words of introduction, after which we will listen to Florence Alexi LaRose tell us something about sustainable development, community building, rural development, indigenous peoples, and emerging oil and gas economy. David?
Thank you, Terence, and good morning, everyone in Guyana and internationally joining us today for episode 7 of what is our last of a series that we've had this year, 2022, and we'll be continuing in January with you on other topics. So it's a pleasure to have everyone join us today in this joint venture we've been launching with the Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium here in cold and chilly Washington. So despite the rains in Guyana, you've got some really nice weather. So enjoy it. As Terence mentioned, and to just reiterate, we think it's really critical as we've been covering various issues in Guyana regarding the growth of the new energy and oil and gas economy, and how not only the government, but the private sector, civil society, and different groups in the country engage in developing and executing the strategy of how do you manage this growth and how do you make this growth equitable, balanced, sustainable for Guyana, both in the present and the future, in terms of the needs of the population, which at the end of the day is the key issue. A lot of our webinars have focused on energy needs, utility, how to leverage low cost available 24/7 available energy in different sectors of the economy, as well as issues such as the role of the diaspora in engaging, particularly in what is a large geographic country, but a small population country. And what are the challenges and opportunities that brings for Guyana? In this particular case, we're really pleased to be able to talk about the need for a holistic and integrated approach to economic and social development in a way that provides effective participatory integration of the various indigenous nations and communities in Guyana, which hitherto have been, to one degree or another, not central part of development initiatives of past governments. And we think there's a great opportunity now, not only for the current government, but the overall initiative taking place in terms of energy growth and economic growth writ large, to bring forth and integrate effectively the different nations in Guyana, and with a particular focus, as was mentioned with the new carbon credit purchased by Terence, environmental issues and geographic issues and resource management issues, which are always best handled at the local level, and bring in these communities throughout the country to make sure that they have an input, a voice, and an integrated approach into the development needs and discussions of the country. So for us, it's a pleasure to have you all with us, former Vice President and Minister Alicock, and the team from the University of Guyana and Florence. And we hope that this will lead into more discussions in the future and next year to really leverage the opportunities that Guyana has now to really be cutting edge examples of how to integrate indigenous nations into this process and make sure that the resource availability is there to jumpstart and support the development needs of these communities, and not only at the national level, but particularly at the regional and local levels. So with that, Terence, let's go on with the show. And thank you all again. Welcome.
Thank you. So I inadvertently noted that I said Alexei, but what we intended, and so we will do that, is to have Sydney Alicock sort of lead us off in this context. I should say that we've met before. We've met eating lava and drinking creek water, so it means that I have to come home, and so I want to welcome Guyanese of great distinction to offer a few remarks with regard to the former Vice President of Guyana, Sydney Hour Club.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blackman, Mr. Lewis, and all you wonderful people out there at this very crucial time of discussion. First and foremost, I must wholeheartedly thank you for giving me especially an opportunity to share some ideas which could be added to the plan of what we would like to have. Indeed, this initiative is a great one. For us as indigenous peoples, the time is right. And it's now our opportunity to get to that point of being able to manage our affairs. I am truly grateful for this opportunity to talk about the involvement of the indigenous peoples in this oil economy and the environment. I would like to say that this is a lot of money that you're talking about, and it's a great opportunity to which we need to focus and be able to develop the plan, a plan of action, a plan that will give us not only sustainability, but regenerative operations, especially with regards to Mother Nature, from where all oil and diamonds and everything has come. I would like to say that this is old pathways, but new directions for all Guyanese, not only for the indigenous peoples. It's an opportunity for us to plan, to have this plan of action that will allow each and every Guyanese to benefit, but more so for us who have been in the hinterland taking care of Mother Nature while Mother Nature is taking care of us, to step up to say exactly how we should be able to manage our development with the support of the newfound riches of oil and the carbon credits. For me, we have between 70 to 100 souls of indigenous peoples of the nine groups of indigenous peoples. The hinterland, especially regions 1, 7, 8, and 9 are more populated than the other regions, but we have indigenous peoples in all regions. And we have been able to develop what we call the National Two-Shows Council, the authorized body or the legal body to deal with the managerial aspect of development. However, we have not really had the scope. While we have intelligent young people and more graduates coming out of university, we do not have the technical capabilities of managing as yet our own affairs. So we totally depend on the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, which of course that's the mother for the indigenous people. We have that. But we need to have a group, a special group aside besides of the two shows. We should have a technical group. This money should be able to give us that opportunity to train a specialty group to help us manage our affairs. It is also an opportunity for security of this funding to be in an indigenous bank. For now, we could keep it probably in the Bank of Guyana until we could have such persons trained in the various aspects of banking, in project management, in the development of industries within various regions. Take, for example, the cassava, food security. We need things like a better facility in every region with regards to agricultural skills to help us to continue to work in having food security. We also need to have a group of special youths studying in the environment, studying the natural resources, so that we could follow our development and our input and what we are receiving, and to decide on what direction we should take. Which leads me on to, we should have probably 3 great meetings of the minds of the indigenous peoples, which would include the elders, to be able to come up with this plan that I'm speaking about. So we would have our voices, our thinking in the process. That would call for eventually having technical or special institutions in the hinterland where our people could be studying all these things with regards to nature. You have to remember, for us, we always say there are 4 pillars of life for us, and that is clear, pure water, fresh air, sunlight, and common sense, which could be termed as science. And to do that, you need the place, the space, to be able to allow our education, the education of true life, real life, to evolve into this society. We are here in Guyana, and most of the Guyanese do not know what a beautiful or rich country we have. So we need that sort of a system in place so that we could be able to manage in a better way. Of course, you would have an oversight body. That would be, let us say, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, members of the diaspora, persons from the citizens of Guyana, the private partners, and I think Hess and the oil companies would be giving us this money. It's a lot of money. You need a secured place. You need the people to be able to execute it. It must be a program of continuous education to our indigenous brothers and sisters. We have had many years, although it may not seem as though we did anything to say that we did national development, But we were the ones, and we have always been the ones to take care of the forest, so that we believe the forest would take care of us. And this is what is now the outcome. The riches of this country is from the protection of Mother Nature. So I am happy to be giving you this first. I know there would be many more, and the discussion, I'm quite certain, will continue. There are more things, but in details, you will definitely have to come home for us to continue eating this ladder. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. This you've just outlined in some very wonderful way, the pillars of life. Uh, the water, the air, the sunlight, and common sense. And sometimes there are some colleagues of mine who say that, we wonder why we call it common sense, because it's not so common. And so my intent here was to my common sense was to bracket in the construction of our conversation today, was to have your remarks, sort of the wisdom of the elder, but now to hear from Florence Alexi LaRose, the young person who's, you're the root and then the leaves, of the tree. And the question is, sometimes the leaves and the root don't, or the root can't see what the leaves can see. So Florence, share with us what the leaves are seeing and how you see the community unfolding, and where you see the opportunities and the challenges.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Panelists, fellow panelists, nice to see you all. Some very familiar faces. So when we talk about development in communities, more so in this case, indigenous communities, how are we viewing the people of those communities? That is the first question that we need to consider when we're looking at investing any resources or building any capacity of anyone. Are they viewed as the protagonists of their own development? Are they viewed as part of the process to their development? Or are they viewed as spectators to their development? What we need to recognize is that everyone has a share in this enterprise of development, whether it is oil and gas, whether it is carbon credits, or any other resource that the country is exploring or may wish to explore as an avenue towards development of the country, development of its people. As the contribution of each Guyanese serves to enrich the whole. And when I say the whole, I mean the movement of Guyana and its people as a country, the upward movement. So how are we have to also ask ourselves, how are we raising up resources? And when I talk about resources here, I'm talking about our human resources. How are we raising up these human resources? And not just raising them up, but how are we accompanying them in each place, in each village, in each community, in each neighborhood? How are we doing that? How are we providing opportunities, not just at the level of the country or the region, because we could say, oh, we're providing X amount of this or X amount of that on a whole, or as a region, we have X amount of percent. But sometimes those percentages that are being referred to are found in just a niche neighborhood or a niche region, or in this case, most of the time, it's in the coastline. So how are we providing opportunities, not just at the level of the country or the region, but also in those neighborhoods? How are we providing opportunities in the villages? I know that it is a formidable challenge, but also a critical need. In the context of oil and gas, to me, there are three things that stand out as necessary to ensure that the indigenous population of Guyana are integrally involved in the process. That is education, training, and access. Education and training, I will take it together. So when we talk about education and training, how can we benefit from revenues to upgrade the education and training facilities and opportunities available to the hinterland communities? how can oil and gas training be made equally available to hinterland residents? Because of the challenges, such as communication, they're oftentimes the last to know of these trainings and opportunities. Or perhaps only a select few may be aware of what is happening. As it is, higher education and access to higher education from the hinterland is a struggle. And I can tell you this because not only am I from the hinterland, but I've also worked with the hinterland communities in the area of social, economic, and cultural development for over a decade. So I know what the struggles are, and it's not easy for persons coming from the hinterland to access higher education or access these trainings that are, opportunities that need to be snapped up in a timely manner. When we talk about access, we're talking about access to critical information that would inform those opportunities that are available. Access to opportunities to know when they arise, how to tap into these opportunities. The oil and gas sector does not only require persons to drill the oil or to separate the oil, but there are many other opportunities that support the sector. And I mean, if drilling and getting directly involved with the oil is your passion, then you go for it. I mean, you take the required training, and that's awesome. But there are many other opportunities that communities can take advantage of, that communities can be made aware of, many other support opportunities to the sector. How indigenous community can really become involved in the sector and really see themselves as part of this process of development and really see themselves as protagonists of their own development. However, because of the lack of access to information, there is only a limited amount of Guyanese that are able to tap into the opportunities that may arise. And I say Guyanese because I want us to look at the holistic picture. So if only a limited amount of Guyanese can tap into this, what do you think is happening in hinterland? What percentage of Guyanese that are tapping into the sector do you think are coming from the hinterland? You think about that. And think about the challenges and everything else that comes with it. If on the coastline it's difficult, what is happening in hinterland? How many of us know what the Local Content Act says? How many of us knows what is required or what is hoped to be achieved by the end of 2022? There are many, many sectors in there that should villagers get an opportunity to really go through the Local Content Act and really have an opportunity to plan of how they will go forward in fulfilling the deficiencies that are stated in the Local Content Act. Only then will they be able to really appreciate the magnitude and really have the opportunity to see how they can contribute, to the growing sector. If that percentage is low, like for example, when we talk about the Local Content Act, for example, engineering and machining, it is hoped that at the end of 2022, Guyana will be able to provide 5%, as in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of that service to the oil and gas sector. 5%. So that means that 95% of services in engineering and machining will be coming from outside of Guyana. How can the indigenous people tap into this? How can more Guyanese be able to plan in such a way that in the next few years, they will be able to take this percentage up away from 5% to at least 20%, 50%, 100, heading upwards. I understand that the sector is new. I understand that the sector is new to all of us. But at the same time, we need to constantly be thinking of how we can build our human resources capacity. Is my time coming to an end?
Yeah, you have 2 minutes more, but don't rush. 2 minutes, we're perfectly fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So access to long-term planning to develop the capacity human resources to tap into is necessary. It is very necessary for us to start thinking that way. Oil and gas sector will be here for a very long time. And should this, act be liberally shared and studied at the local level, this Local Content Act, then we will definitely be in a better position to plan ourselves and plan the development of our region and our villages and our communities. So this is also where scholarship come into play. Not just any scholarship, but scholarships that are designed to afford indigenous contribution to the sector and to the development of the people and their villages. Yeah. So what appears to be called for is the involvement of a growing number of people in a collective process of learning, one which is focused on the nature and the dynamic of the path that is conducive to the material and social progress of each village and each neighborhood. Such a process would allow its participants to engage in the generation, application, and diffusion of knowledge, which of course is the most potent and indispensable for in the advancement of any society. It is a collective process of systematic learning with meaningful engagement that aims towards not only individual but also collective transformation of the society. The question we need to ask ourselves really is, are we viewing the indigenous people as protagonists of their own development? Are we creating the spaces and opportunities to build capacity to engage meaningfully in the oil and gas sector? Are we raising up resources in each village and neighborhood and accompanying them to become involved? Are we involving a growing number of people in a collective process of learning about the sector that is new to all of us in a way that will contribute to the progress of the village and the country at large? In order to foster this continuous expansion of opportunities and access to critical information, a culture of growth and a passion for continuous development in the hinterland must be consciously nurtured. Meaningful conversation with the wider community is key to maintaining the involvement of all those interested in contributing to its progress. Mm-hmm. Sustainable progress requires a continued focus on nurturing growth and building capacities, as well as the ability and discipline to reflect on action and learn from experience. So until we get ourselves in that mode of learning, opportunities for the hinterland and wider Guyana will continue to be as is. Thank you.
Thank you. As I listen to you talk about, how are we viewing folks in the community, and how are we raising up human resources and so on. I must confess, this is precisely why this conversation is important, and I must confess on our own part, and I think I will get David to confess this also. We have had, the local content has been one of our signature things that we have discussed in this program, because we feel like this is the way that Guyanese will access. And it struck me a moment ago that in all of our local content programs, we had neglected until now to have someone discuss, and this is the most local of local content, to have someone talk about local content within the context of indigenous communities in Guyana. I'm sure this is probably the first time that has actually been said in a public way, in the way that you've said it. And so I'm very pleased, and also this is why we have to have broad conversations, because everyone, our blind spots get revealed in things, even when we think we don't have blind spots, or even when you plan to not have blind spots, you do. And so we have to be mindful and ensure the broad conversation. But there are two things that you've mentioned that I think are really deep and insightful. This question of the Local Content Act and its dissemination within the context of villages, and the way in which the indigenous communities can empower, innovate, can create some dynamic around local content, I think is something that's very important, not just for indigenous communities, but for all communities across Guyana. And the second thought, which I like, is this idea of a hinterland region higher education initiative. So what is our interest? If that is our interest, is there an initiative that drives that forward? And it's in that context, maybe, again, thinking slightly differently, that our next two guests are or part of our program, we wanted to have an example of what we're talking about. I mean, so here's 15% of $750 million. That's just on this small thing, right? So one would assume that that is not all there is to do. So what would you do if you had that? And one of the things I think you should do is I think you should invest in the learning of languages and the preserving and learning of and the dissemination of languages of indigenous communities. And in this regard, we're joined by Charlene Wilkerson and Trevon Beard, who will jointly tell us something about the work that they have been doing in relation to languages. So, Trevon and Charlene, you guys can, you guys will take the conversation forward from here and give us some of your insight, and then we'll come back to some broad discussion.
Thank you, Terence. So we have been posed with the question of the integration of the indigenous peoples of Guyana into this development program that we see happening in Guyana. So I'll speak more broadly to development and indigenous peoples, as Charlene will follow up on the matter of languages. So from the time of our oil discovery, the promise of oil was a promise of radical transformation. And this transformation is what we often term as development. And development is a global pursuit. No one is unaffected by it. Us in our own spaces, in contradiction to those that we might view as developed. This idea of development conjures up images of, poor, desperate, backward or destitute people who in some ways need assistance or saving of some kind. And therefore it legitimizes a kind of interventionist approach to the restructuring of their societies, their lives and economies. Development is often represented as massive infrastructure, widespread use of technology and its applications. It is seen as mass production, mass consumption as well. It is usually measured by the stuff that we can produce and how much we can produce, particularly for the market, and how much we get for it, the income it generates. Development is seen as a linear process and both natural and inevitable. And because it is normally defined in these narrow terms of income generation and technological advancement, indigenous peoples have become major targets of its practice. However, these metrics do not usually tell the full story. It does not tell the stories of people's life satisfaction and enjoyment, and it often masks inequalities that are usually inequalities, and they are also usually incompatible with the values traditionally associated with indigenous people. Therefore, I believe if we are to integrate indigenous peoples into this transformation that we envision oil wealth will bring to our nation, we have to be prepared to be open-minded about what development is and recognize that its definition might vary across cultural groups. We need to take a rights-based approach in some sense that honors the indigenous people's rights to self-determination. And this includes not only the transformation that they want to see happen in their communities, but also the things that we might deem important and useful that they do not want to see transformed onto their spaces. So in thinking about these different conceptions of development, we can take an example at looking at environment and sustainability. for the Western world and for us who have been integrated into this global system, nature is often seen as a resource to be exploited, commodities to be exchanged for profits. Largely, this is what the oil is. Now, given this principle of economic growth or GDP growth as a major marker of what we define development to be, extensive and excessive resource extraction is usually consistent with what um, are the goals of development. And some believe that we can exist in this kind of one-sided relationship with the environment in which we extract the resources and its value without giving back because of certain dualist ontological perspectives that have emerged with the model of this economy that we're living in. And we are expected to have this kind of relationship with nature in which we subdue it and and extract as much gain as possible. But this is not necessarily the same thing for indigenous peoples. Traditionally, indigenous peoples have held animist beliefs in which non-human entities such as animals, the trees or the forests, and even the rivers and mountains are imbued with life and spirit, and they are much a part of the society as we are. And this kind of non-dualist ontological approach regulates the way in which indigenous people have interacted with the environment. So for a long time, people tend to think that the reason why we might see or view indigenous peoples as undeveloped or not utilizing and maximizing the resources in their living spaces, in their communities, in regards to the kind of monetary value that they hold, is because they probably do not have the technological means to do so. But that is not necessarily the case. Historically, even archaeological evidence suggests that um, indigenous peoples have manipulated their environment. They have worked it and reworked it to their benefit, but they have done it in such a way that there's subtle changes to the environment in terms of the life that is there that is very different to the ways in which we might do it um, in our approach to nature. And even more recently, I can point to the example of the South Central People's Development Association, who in 2015 won the UN Peace Equator Prize for their initiative in mapping and managing their resources. So what they have done is that they've used innovative techniques, they've used drones and all of these technological things that we might not associate with indigenous peoples, and but they did it to further sustain their lifestyles with their environment. And therefore we have to recognize that the approaches or even the definition of development itself might differ coming from the peoples and indigenous people, and therefore we need to honor and respect those um, perceptions. And that's why the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples clearly states that indigenous peoples have a right to self-determination. So that is the rights-based approach I'm talking about, is that they must be given that right to self-determination, whatever the path of development might be. It might not be consistent with what we think development is or should be, but this right remains with indigenous peoples and their communities. Another convention we can point to is that of the ILO 1957, which suggests, and I'm going to read an excerpt from that. It says, considering that there exists in various independent countries, indigenous and tribal and semi-tribal populations that are not yet integrated into the national community and whose social, economic, cultural situation hinders them from benefiting from the rights and advantages enjoyed by other elements of the population. And this is exactly what we're talking about. However, they further state that government shall have the primary responsibility for developing coordinated and systematic action for the protection of populations concerned and their progressive integration into the life of the respective countries. But notwithstanding all of that, recourse to force or coercion as a means of promoting integration of these populations into the national community shall be excluded. So then again, it speaks to that same rights of the indigenous peoples to determine their own programs, to determine their own processes. Ms. LaRose puts it as being the protagonists of their own development, right? And we see that again in the same example that I mentioned of the South Central, um, the South Central Association that won that prize. They stated in a statement that in common with many indigenous peoples across South America, Wapichan communities are vulnerable to land grabs, marginalization, because they lack secure legal title over much of their traditional lands. Wapichan territory is threatened by mega road projects, things that we deem developmental, and external plans for logging, which we might see as bringing in income. Mining and agribusiness, the same thing. And right now, there's a gold rush in the region that is causing water pollution, deforestation, social disruption, and damage to traditional hunting and fishing grounds. So, a lot of the things that we might mention there are things that we might regard as development and on the path of development, but they have listed these as obstacles to their own livelihoods. And finally, on the point of the environment that I spoke about, in that these perspectives about the environment that regulates the way they interact with the environment is often seen as being embedded within their language. In fact, one researcher in West Africa has shown a correlation between the dying of indigenous languages and the depletion of the biodiversity there. And with that, I will turn over to Charlene, who will give more insight about the language and in the development space.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very, very nicely done. Uh,
And
Charlene
having
Richardson.
yes, and having heard all three of you, I had to roll up the paper I wrote, throw it away, and wheel and come again. And I want to start with where I was going to close, and I'm going to make a quote from the Cape Syllabus for Literatures in English, which says, literature is arguably the most vital register of the major ideas, concerns, feelings, aspirations, and hopes of the communities out of which it comes. To know literature is therefore to be familiar with the communities that have produced it. Now, this is the Cape Syllabus for Literatures in English, and we all of us are familiar with the whole idea of translation and the whole world, the English spoken, so-called English speaking world, getting access to materials in other languages through translation. I want to flip that somewhat to suggest to you that if and every single year for the last 6 years, um, the use of English program at the University of Guyana has introduced a lecture called the Linguistic Reality of Guyana. I usually give that lecture, and Every single year, we've noticed a slight shift in the consciousness of the Guyanese, the young students that come in, both young and old that come in. It started with people saying, we didn't even know that Guyana had other languages. Believe you me, there are people in Region 4 who probably are still saying that. And then later on, you get a growing consciousness. And when you do surveys with the students and ask them what languages they speak, they no longer say English. They might say English, Creolese, and what other languages they speak. And every single year, I quote Professor Ian Robertson, who's probably quoting from somebody else. I says, when an old person dies, a library is lost. But when a language dies, an entire civilization is lost. Um, so so let me flip back to the beginning, and before I ask it, I invite you to reconsider this whole idea of English people getting access to other cultures. And where we want to go is us turning it around and giving more validity to the spoken languages of the nine peoples of Guyana, the nine indigenous peoples, and to the Creole speakers, many, a great number of whom are also indigenous people. So I really am happy to be presenting with Trevon because he really is the age of he could be my grandson when you look at my age to his age. And it's kind of emblematic of the message we want to bring, that what we need, and I think all of you said it in different ways, all the speakers today, is what we need is conversations around the country with people speaking among groups across the various groups, the various ways in which we identify ourselves across race, across class, across identities, cultural and ethnic identities. The other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is Trevon and I, in having the several conversations that led to this presentation, we didn't speak only in English with each other. We spoke a mixture of English and Creolese to get to where we are. But traditionally, these forums are presented in English. So while I am joyful about presenting with Trevon as my grandson, I am not joyful of the fact that these forums are always in English whenever we're meeting across. And it suggests a kind of narrow, small elite only in conversation, with us not being aware that there can be other kinds of conversations. Now, in my capacity of coordinator of the Guyanese Languages Unit, I would like to say that what we are is a very deliberate political unit. And we have a specific and very transparent kind of work. Not always transparent work, but specific and transparent agenda. And I would say it's one, to support by any peaceful means the agents of linguistic freedom among the peoples of Guyana, and two, to strive to demolish by any peaceful means the forces of linguistic genocide aimed at the indigenous languages of Guyana. And those forces are coming insidiously through people with the best of intentions. And this is the kind of thing I think when we talk about people owning their communities and owning the direction in which their lives are to go, we cannot leave out the issue of language. So linguistic genocide has its origins in a mindset that arises from the racist ideology of cognitive genetic deficit. In current education systems, it manifests in our education programs because it is undergirded by an education policy set up by our original colonizers. Even when our young people escape, quote unquote, to developed countries and become part of the now cherished Guyanese diaspora, this particular manifestation of racism follows them. Let me give a simple example. In the US, Guyanese students are often identified as slow learners and put into remedial language programs and generally remedial programs when they fail to pass the test given to them in English. Now, this is not because there is anything inside the school system inherently against them, but their parents take off English when they're asked to fill out the forms that sign up their children for the American school systems. So they're given a test in English with no recognition of the fact that they come from language speaking backgrounds that are other than English. If that were the case, they would have been put into either mother tongue education programs, or at least the recognition that they need those programs would have been part of the discussion for the conversation in the US school systems, or they would be put into programs that taught English as a second language. This does not happen for Guyanese children resident in the United States. Now, while you would expect charity to begin at home, Creole speaking children, indeed the majority of Guyanese children are Creole speaking, and children who speak indigenous languages have a faith that is not so different. So what do I mean by this? You may recall a few weeks ago, the Ministry of Education put out the glorious passes of Cape and Caribbean students coming first for the whole Caribbean. When you look at how many students there were about 7 of them, if so many. One girl topped in Cape in natural sciences, about 3 or 4 topped in humanities, science, business. One young man topped in TVET, and one got 2 special prizes in agriculture. And this is right across the Caribbean. But not long after that announcement, there was a letter in the press from one Jerry Jailal, who pointed out that, and I'm quoting him here, he says, our educational system is inherently unequal and inequitable. He pointed out that while the Ministry of Education celebrated the few, it failed to publish the results that showed how many students from the entire cohort entering this year actually passed 5 or more subjects. The letter writer pointed out that only 213 of that over 10,000 students secured grade 1s in 8 or more subjects. The overall pass rate at the general and technical proficiencies for grades 1 to 3 in CSEC was 68.5%, which means the failure rate was 31.5%, which is quite high. It's a failure rate, not just low grades, but failure. The major problem, he continues, of our educational system is that it is inherently unequal and inequitable and designed to produce failures. Too many gaps exist across the years, and he's speaking about in both political administration. And you're talking about 33 years of one and 25 years of another. And, you know, when we talk about progress, we look at those incremental steps in percentages of students passing, and we don't look at the how many failed, a large percentage of failure. Now, in 2016, UNESCO put out a report entitled, If You Don't Understand, How Can You Learn? That was the title of the report. And in that report, they noted that quality education should be delivered in the language spoken at home. However, this minimum standard is not met for hundreds of millions, limiting their ability to develop foundations for learning. By one estimate, as much as 40% of the global population does not have access to an education in a language they speak or understand. The challenges are most prevalent in regions where linguistic diversity is greatest, such as in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Now, I'm speaking from the UNESCO report. But what my position is that we can't blame UNESCO for not mentioning the linguistic diversity of this Caribbean South American nation called Guyana, when almost invariably, when promoting Guyana as a tourist destination, The only linguistic statement we make about this country is Guyana is the only English-speaking country in South America, which is really a misrepresentation of the actual linguistic competence of the larger number of Guyanese people. And is my time up?
We're
No,
close. Yeah.
all right, let
Yeah.
me skip over. My time is completely up.
No, go for 2 minutes more. I like this Guyana. We taking it as a badge of honor. You've destroyed this
Yes,
badge of
yes,
honor.
it's a
Guyana is
badge
the
of honor.
only
Yeah, I need to
country
shatter
in
it.
South
You can bring it back once you bring in the other languages. Now, but not let me not sound like I'm bashing the Ministry of Education, because the new curriculum is quite phenomenal, because it notes this. This is the new curriculum of the ministry. It says Guyana is a nation with a diversity of languages, culture, heritage, and economic activities. And that same curriculum also directly addresses the cognitive mismatch between the language spoken by the majority of Guyanese, including many indigenous people, and the official language of schooling. And that language is Creolese. Now, so right, I mentioned
So I
the
wanted
point about our introductory. I see something on the screen, Alison
yes, I
putting up.
see the comment that you just made. Someone listening said that they had exactly
Oh,
experienced it.
okay. But can I get back my time after you finish reading this?
No, I just popped it up so that people can read it as
Oh,
well.
right.
As
Beautiful.
yes. So
Yes,
you have
exactly.
two
Thank you,
minutes, please.
Alison. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So we are moving in the right direction. I cannot be a hypocrite and say leave the oil in the ground, but this, in fact, when Trevor explained to you, and I'll tell you a little story about a young Akawayo student who graduated with his bachelor's degree by doing research that required him to use his language and discourse with the elders of his community. That is Region 8, Upper Mazaruni. Um, his research blew my mind, because what he did is unearthed the ways in which, as Trevon said to you, language reveals certain epistemologies, certain ontologies, the simple ways that the elders could study the movements of birds, the movements of plants, to read the climate, to read the weather. We don't have that available in English. And some of these things are untranslatable. So, what I'm suggesting is that you have 10% of Guyana's population. Fortunately, it is the fastest growing population. Indigenous peoples are growing at a phenomenal rate, and it is not something we should lament about. It is something we should rejoice about, because we're really anxious to hustle in there and tell the girls not to make so many children. I have a problem with that. If we have that population recognized for the validity they bring to other ways of seeing, other ways of living through their languages, and make that our national project, I would want to close with what Dr. Shona Jackson once asked. She said, "Are you Guyanese settler, or are you indigenous?" I think that we can claim an element of settler and an element of indigeneity by really understanding and learning from our indigenous people, so that those literatures that are created in the future by the little babies, 5 and 6 years old, now learning to talk their languages, that a whole universe or several universes of literatures can be our future, where the Guyanese people take the Lelal money and turn it into something beautiful, and hurry quick, close it off, and turn around this whole way of being and developing. That's it, Terence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. This thing has unearthed. This was not the plan. I mean, we couldn't have envisioned the richness of this conversation. Uh, make some sense from it. How do we
Well,
take this thing and move it forward?
yes, thank you all. This has been very enriching and a variety of new issues and initiatives. Let me go back to the origin, which is the involvement and protagonism of indigenous nations in this new economic oil energy growth venture that Guyana is involved in. For better or for worse, as Charlene said, you're not going to say leave the oil in the ground. It's happening, and the question is, what do we do with it? How do we maximize it and provide benefits for this 10% of the population? But more importantly to me is the fact that that 10% of the population represents a much larger geography of Guyana. So it's not just the numbers of people, but it's the geography they represent. And somebody mentioned an issue I want to bring attention to regarding land rights and land security. So I think going back, and particularly with the expected resources from the carbon purchase, I think we need to start focusing on what are the organizational structures with government and with the private sector that the indigenous nations need to set up in order to ensure that these rights are followed up on and that these initiatives which come from the regional and local communities can be brought to bear on the use of these resources. Former Vice President and Minister mentioned something very practical, which is at some point these monies should be in an indigenous bank. That's a very practical issue. We have resources. If the resources are ours, then we should be able to manage them in our institutions. Well, the same way, we're going to need organizational structures for all these areas. And I've got 4 areas which I think come out of this discussion. One is the issue of developing, supporting, nurturing, and saving indigenous knowledge and usage of that knowledge, both in terms of health, nature, the language issue. Second one, the issue of environmental and sustainability management of nature. Yes, we're not leaving the oil in the ground. Yes, we're not leaving the gas in the ground, but there's everything that was mentioned with regards to mining, road development, infrastructure, construction, which has an impact on indigenous nations and their communities. And we need to find a balance for that. Well, if we have these now, 15% of $750 million, to do the math, folks, is 11 million US dollars. Well, there's something you can work on to ensure that we have that balance. Third, land security issues, not only in Guyana, but everywhere in the Americas. The number one issue for indigenous nations and communities is the fact that governments and businesses have failed them in terms of securing land rights and being able to provide them with that security, which in their life has gone back for generations. But in this modern world, if you don't have a government document which says you own this piece of land, all of a sudden you're left abandoned. And fourth and final, but not the least, everything we've been discussing on language development and autonomy, because the language brings the wealth of knowledge of these peoples for generations past. And the only way to ensure that wealth of knowledge continues into future generations is being able to nurture, develop, and maintain the autonomy of that language. And again, if we have the resources and we set up organizational structures, we can then establish procedures, activities, events, initiatives to make sure that we guarantee these 4 areas: indigenous knowledge, environmental sustainability, land security, and language development. Thank you, everybody. And I hope we have now some questions from the audience and discussions additionally from the panel.
Yeah, if I might take the prerogative to return to Vice President Sidney Alec Hawk, I was particularly interested in your proposal of a technical group, because in a sense this program arose as a kind of technical group. And so I wanted you to take a moment to sort of expand a bit on, the technical group, how you see the technical group evolving that would, say, be an advisory council to the National Tushal Council. How do you see that work unfolding?
Thank you very much again. As we said, and I like what the other speakers said, and just to elaborate, we are in a situation where we have the means now to give to our young people that specialty skill to be able to create now, to improve upon our education, appropriate education. In the hinterland, we have that education that is not shared, and we need that education to share. A lot of developers, a lot of NGOs in the past, and even until now, they would say you're below the poverty line, and we are going to take education into the hinterland. I prefer to hear we say we are going to share education, because we have survived even before English was spoken in this country. And we made it. We turned poison into edible stuff, the cassava, the bitter cassava roots. That was high science. So I am seeing this here for us not to fall into the Dutch disease, as they would say, from the oil money. You need a body who is going to, the technical body who is going to study those oil countries that got the disease, and to be able to select the various areas for development. First is, how do we manage this money? What is it that we need? As a matter of fact, first of all, what is life? So we go to check on things like we must have these technical people who understands the real source of water, the real use of sunlight, the understanding of how the ecosystems work, and to have a technical group, to see the volume of extraction of our natural resources, and to see if the Guyanese people are truly benefiting from this extraction. We're now having oil money. We shouldn't be digging into the gold and to the diamond and to the other resources too quickly. So we need a body to be able to help the indigenous peoples to put these elders together, along with the Tushals and other agencies from the university, from the private sector, from the persons, from the diaspora, and even from from HES. From HES shouldn't just dump this money on us like that without understanding what we are getting into. Are we ready to accept this money? Some of us might say yes, but those would be those who have educated themselves away from themselves and is in this greedy world. But if you want Guyana and the people of Guyana to be here for many, many moons, and to have a country to talk about for generations to come, then we need such a body. We need food security. We must not do agriculture in a way that you're going to destroy the soil. I know they have a great problem with the slash and burn, but those are terms that are used to sound barbaric. We prefer to see, shifting cultivation, because when we do that, it assists the forest to have the new plants coming up. Most of them, the younger plants are of medicinal value. And when we move in the next 30, 40 years, you're back to a new forest again. But we need that technical group to give guidance. And we have that. I think that is what, and we could go on into the how the money is going to work, how we are going to work with government, what it is that they would be doing, what is it that NGOs are doing. At the moment, we have so many things going on, and it's what do you call doubling up. You're repeating the issues in not the issues, the programs in the communities, and the communities hardly have time to go to their farms or to do their community development because every day is capacity building. You see all these things. Every home you go to, you would see all these documents. But where is the capacity? They do these workshops, but you don't see the output, the capacity. You don't have the time. So you need that body to now have an overall look at what it is that we are doing to the indigenous peoples and the country at large.
Yeah.
So that is one way of trying to explain.
No, VP, I think what you know, we had some conversations last night at dinner, and the question was a state planning enterprise for Guyana, which no longer exists. And so things feel like you just described them somehow overwhelming, somehow ad hoc, somehow occurring all of the time. And you raised it you raised it in a beautiful way. Where is the capacity that has emerged from all of this capacity building? And so perhaps, Florence, I want to ask you to tell us, where's the capacity that has emerged from all of the capacity building, or have we been doing enough capacity building? You're muted.
I can't tell you where the capacities are, but what I can tell you is the need for continuous expansion, you know, the need for involvement of a growing number of persons. And when I say, okay,
Folks are enjoying listening to you.
Yeah. So when I say involvement of a growing number of persons, note I didn't say a large number. The word growing there is deliberately used to tell us that there is need for continuous building of human resources, continuous building of capacities. That's the only way as a country we will be able to take advantage of the opportunities that will arise from this industry and from any other industry that we hope to tap into in the future. We have to understand that the oil and gas sector is not going to go away tomorrow, one, or two, it's not going to finish tomorrow or the next day either. It will be here for quite a while. So how are we preparing the next generation, the current generation, to tap into the opportunities? You know, as I would have mentioned before, not everyone needs to go and drill the oil. There are many other opportunities that communities, neighborhoods, villages can take advantage of. How are we preparing our people in looking at the needs of the local content app, in seeing how we can fulfill those deficiencies that are present in the app? We have to also remember that it is a collective process, and it is not just a collective process, but it's a collective process of systematic learning. And only meaningful engagement with the people will bring out the needs and the direct us of how we need to advance in this process to ensure that we're all involved in the process and we all get to benefit from it as Guyanese, individually and collectively. And definitely I continue to stress that human resource development is what is needed. We're definitely back in that sector, and we need to push to see how we're really going to tap into that and how we're going to use our next gen. Not use. I don't want to use the word use necessarily. How we're going to prepare the next generation to capture what is rightfully theirs.
Trevon, I want to bring this to you. She just raised this issue that you kind of touched on, the question of development. She talked about human resource development, and I know that when you presented earlier, you talked about development within the kind of rights-based approach to self-determination. From your perspective as someone who's at the Amerindian Research Institute at the University of Guyana, how do you see development in this context? Give us a thought on what you see as the kind of development from your perspective. You're muted.
Sorry. Yes.
Got it.
Like I said, there are various conceptions about development, and Cindy made a very interesting and excellent point about the money is from yes, as in talking about whether we're ready to accept it or not, right? Because
be ready to accept it. Can you leave it on the
pardon?
table?
Sorry,
Can you not
sorry.
be ready to accept it? Can we somehow leave it? You've muted yourself again.
Was the question directed to me?
So he was saying I suppose you can jump in. I mean, can you say no? I'm not ready to accept it.
I was not really saying it in that manner. It's to question ourselves if we are ready to accept this volume of money. Where would it be safe for us to use for every one of us to benefit? Remember the plan that I spoke about. What is the plan? When you're ready, there should be a plan. That is my point of to accept this, because if you don't have security, or if we are not told, or if we do not have this discussion to decide upon how we are going to utilize this, then somebody else would do it for us. And that is not, I think, the purpose of this meeting is to find out if we can, or if we should, or if we must take this direction. Are we ready for it? How do we do it? So just going back a little bit to Alexi's point there, I'm not saying that the training, the capacity building shouldn't happen, but we should, at the same time, we must have things going on. And a good example is in Region 9, in the Anai area, there is a place that we call the Green Center. It is for the development of skills. And it is good to see that the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs and the Ministry of Labor has continued the program, which is good for the young people. We have a lot of persons, we have, the government is giving us, the communities, a lot of things like buses, tractors, vehicles, and a lot of them are broken because you do not have skilled people. So this place is to do that sort of, not capacity building, but the actual training. So when you come from there, all these tractors, up to yesterday, I saw the 7 tractors on the way going to communities again. But there is a difficulty of maintenance and longevity of the thing to bring back that agricultural or whatever program, the benefits back to the people. So as long as you have what I would term a tractor needs an operator. not a driver. So that's the difference. And because you have mainly drivers, you do not see the flourishing farms, but you have it as a taxi running around the place. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing of that, but we could do more because tractors have attachments that you could do other things with. And that is the capacity I'm talking about. Your capacity is built here, then you go and you show it here. So the flow must continue, but we need to see the output. So then we are going to be ready. Well, I think nobody's going to refuse the money because this is just the 30% Hess is giving us. So later on, we are going to have, we got to see how much oil money we are getting to put in there. And how much of the gold money is going to come there. How much of the tourism money is going to come there. And tourism is big for the hinterland. So these are areas, you got to look at the areas where we could be trained. And Alexi made a good point there where not only the oil we have to focus on, but the offshoots of the oil. Tourism, the oil, people wants to have a relaxation for 2 weeks. You have these locations, the tourism sites in the hinterland. They need food. That's where we should be focusing on food security, so they don't buy food from Mars, but from the hinterland. You're getting all these things. Services from the hinterland to the coast, transportation. Those are the things that we need to, I think, in my humble opinion, focus on so we get the benefit from that oil. Not all of us have to go in the oil business.
Yeah, I mean it's true. You know, when in my earlier life, I worked at the Guyana Airways Corporation when I was just out of high school, and so it was sort of my first introduction to places like Mbamidai, Paramakatay, and there was a thriving business with the GAC Twin Otter that would go into these regions on a daily basis, and it's somehow surprising in a way. Somehow we've seemed to have lost some of that integration that was a part of the society sort of in an earlier time. I wanted to, the time is running out. So this conversation, we definitely have to do another conversation like this in a longer form, because as you can see, many things have emerged in this discussion that I can say that David and I did not think of when we initially planned the program. So the richness of the conversation has kind of revealed a number of other things that we really ought to talk about. But I wanted to, as we close, I wanted to go back to Charlene, and I wanted to, when you spoke about the CSEC results and so on, and it struck me, is there a breakout of the data of the CSEC for indigenous communities? I mean, is there a clear data trail that says, how indigenous communities in a very specific sense are doing on the various CSEC exams on math, and then I wanted you to use that as a riff to kind of give your sort of closing thought, and then I'll come to Alexi and to Sydney, Trevon, if your mic works well, and then finally go to David for closing. So you have the floor, Charlene.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that the Ministry of Education does have that data, though it is not published. It's not available to it's available, but it's not going to be easily shown by the ministry to the public. You will have to go there, request it. I wanted to make a point though about Minister Ali Cox's final thoughts. In terms of the sustainability that Florence is talking about, not only do you need your technical team, but you need your financial team. Let me tell you the story of Haitian Creole, for example, that became available on Google just around the time of the 2010 earthquake. Done by a linguist. I don't think he asked for any money. He just wanted to serve the Haitian people. This is a white American linguist who set up created the whole, used the necessary linguistic knowledge to create that app to put Google Translate, Haitian Creole on Google Translate, but Google owns it because Haiti didn't have the whatever you need, whatever engine you need to make it available. So in the long run, we might have as many technically skilled people as we want. And we do. The Caribbean is incredibly skilled in the area of linguistics, but we don't own the engines, and I don't know enough about the technology. But I do know that when they become put out there to the wider world, we don't control what happens to those finances that come in. So that is something that we really, yours, Dr. Blackman and Dr. Lewis, need to put to work. How do we without making enemies? Because this is the world we live in. Get some of those profits that accrue from our cultural and intangible wealth. You see.
Thank you.
That's my
Florence?
final word now.
Yes, thank you. Florence, do you want to give us a final?
So, Ms. Wilkinson raised an interesting point there, and we have to recognize that in order to foster this continuous expansion of opportunities, of learning, and access to critical information, which is clearly what was missing when the person would have created that app, and it's also very relevant to community development, we need to have a culture of growth. And not just a culture of growth, but also a passion for continuous development. And this should be consciously nurtured. You have to definitely make a conscious effort towards this venture. And we have to also recognize the importance of having meaningful conversation with the wider community and how that is key to maintaining the involvement of all those persons who are interested in contributing to the progress of any community or any country. Sustainable progress requires a continued focus on nurturing growth. And again, I'm going to stress nurturing capacities, building capacities, as well as the ability and discipline to reflect on action. Because if we're not reflecting on our actions, what are we learning? How are we learning from our actions? So we have to develop that ability and discipline to reflect on our actions and learn from our experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevon. Continuous development, reflection for learning. A last thought from you, if the technology holds up.
Hey, thank you, Terence. My final word is that it is repeating a lot of what I said, um, but in a different way. That indigenous peoples have um, lots to offer to the discourse of development itself. It is not only a matter of structuring this discourse in a way that we bring development to indigenous peoples only, but especially where it is environment and sustainability is concerned, indigenous people have a lot to bring to the table. Um, Even as we talk about oil, the oil is not going to last forever, one, and we also are in a state where we are already talking about shifting from it in light of climate crisis and all of that. So there are opportunities and we are seeing those opportunities in terms of the thing that was mentioned earlier about the carbon credits in terms of indigenous peoples being rewarded for their efforts and so on. Whether or not we haven't discussed the topic that I talk about the fairness of that transaction, but clearly there is something um, we need to reshape sometimes and restructure the discourse to not only privilege our kinds of knowledge and ideas, but also bring to the fore that of the indigenous peoples.
VP Yalika, you get
Sorry,
your
yeah.
final thought. Did you wanted to add something quickly,
Yeah, I
Florence?
wanted to add something. I just wanted to say that we keep thinking that this is a lot of money, but do the maths. Do the maths and divide it by 218 communities. It's not a lot. It's what, $10 million? 10 million Guyana dollars? It's not a lot. It seemed like a lot as a collective, but it's not. That's what, one vehicle? So we have to look at our local reality as well.
Yes. Yeah. So you get the last thought on the local reality of 218 communities spread across Guyana. VP Alicott.
Thank you very much again. You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. We can hear you fine.
Okay. We have the golden opportunity. If we could put this technical team, and the technical team is about the legal mind. You have some lawyers, young lawyers, engineers, doctors, researchers, the whole lot of what a country needs, a country as ours need. So you have that technical group to give the advice and to do the research on these oil countries, oil-rich countries, how they operated, and come up with the best possible program for us as indigenous people, and more so for the Guyanese people, because of the what they call the Dutch disease. So in addition to that, it's a lot of money. We're now starting. We are now starting this process, and it's just 30% of the environment, the forest, and this is just the forest. Look at the billions and the trillions we got in oil. That money is supposed to be coming here too, inside this bank that we're talking about. The gold money, the diamond money is similar to that of the oil and the forest money. We should be entitled to that. That 10%, 15% is not. I mean, it's good for us, yes, as a start, but it's not good enough for all these years we have been in the sideline. So now is the time, and now is for us to now come together as Guyanese. I even the thought even came when Trevor was speaking. We have, let us say, 111 million Guyana dollars. You divide it in 6, not 200, divide it into 6. So in every ethnic group, there are unfortunate people. They have people who need to go to college. They need to get a house. They need to live. They need to eat. And this money could be going there. This is money for the carbon, This is not the oil money. The oil money will come to build a road and all these other things. But this is just the thinking. I'm not saying this must happen, but it's just to add to the menu of what we're talking about to get the best possible option. It might never come up again, but at least the idea was there. And this is what I think we are about. And I'm just hoping that we could get some more support. We're getting a lot of support from the diaspora. Thanks so much to both of you for making this a possibility. And if we could get some more support from them, I'm quite certain we will come up with a plan that is going to help the indigenous peoples of Guyana and the Guyanese society total.
Well,
Thank you.
I want to thank you. And just before I forgot, one of your, I guess, someone who you guided in the doctoral dissertation, Mark Charterpaul, when you talked about the food security, he noted that I should offer I should offer you his thanks publicly. So I'm offering on behalf of Mark Charterpaul sort of thanks for the work that you facilitated in his doctoral dissertation. And so we've definitely have to do another program in this regard. David, you get to close us out.
Yes, I just want to make sure we all have the math right. It's 112 million US dollars. And
a lot of money.
this is just one carbon credit activity. As Vice President mentioned, the oil resources is separate, and there will be more carbon credit initiatives because many companies and countries in the world are focusing on this as an opportunity. So I think the most important thing here is organize an action plan, an organizational structure through which to get this action plan going. The Vice President mentioned this technical group, but you need to institutionalize where to put together all these resources, these 9 indigenous nations, these 218 communities, and make sure that you have a voice, leverage, and engagement as protagonists with the government, with the companies in this process. And I think it's a very promising future with many opportunities and many new ideas. We've just begun to sort of touch the tip of the iceberg here, Terence. And I think we've got some work to do for 2023 in terms of being able to follow up on these initiatives with these colleagues and many more people who have been recommended to us for collaboration. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Have a good Christmas.
Have a wonderful, we didn't say that, Bummer.